Mara Tilden didn't see the flashing red and blue lights until it was too late, and by then, her rusted-out Corolla was already pulling to the shoulder of the Pacific Coast Highway, tires crunching gravel like they knew her wallet couldn't take this right now. She yanked her sunglasses off, heart pounding. "Seriously," she muttered, watching the officer approach in her rearview mirror. "I was going maybe 10 over. Miss, you were doing 76 and a 50, the officer said as he leaned down to her window. "License and registration." Mara sighed and handed them over with a polite smile that masked the panic swirling in her gut. Another ticket meant another chunk of her rent money gone, and she was already behind on her electric bill. She waited, tapping her fingers against the steering wheel, watching the ocean crash in the distance. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was rushing to get to her second job as a waitress at a beachside event, probably for a bunch of rich snobs who wouldn't notice if their champagne cost $50 more. The officer returned with a slip of paper and an apologetic shrug. "You can pay it online." "Drive safe." She nodded, trying not to cry as she pulled back onto the road. The valet stand outside the private beach club was lined with luxury cars, sleek, shiny, and so far removed from Mara's reality it almost made her laugh. She parked behind the building, grabbed her apron, and jogged in through the staff entrance. The event was already buzzing white tents, strings of lights, a bar carved from ice. She weaved through servers and guests, balancing a tray of oysters as she scanned the crowd. Old money types, new money tech bros, women in dresses she couldn't afford even on clearance. Same scene, different night, and then she saw him, standing by the private cabana bar talking to a man in a sharp navy suit, was the most unfairly attractive person she'd ever seen. Tall, lean, dark hair that curled slightly at the edges, and a jawline sharp enough to make her forget she hadn't eaten since noon. "Don't stare," she whispered to herself before turning away. But her tray wobbled as someone bumped into her from behind, and in a blink, half a dozen oysters launched forward, one landing directly on the man's pristine white shirt. "Oh my God," she gasped. He looked down, then up, blinking in surprise. "Well, that's new. I am so sorry," Mara stammered, grabbing a napkin from her apron. "I'll pay for the shirt. I'll relax," he said, smiling. "I hate oysters anyway," she blinked. "Wait, you're not mad, disappointed maybe," he teased, tilting his head. "But only because you didn't throw them at the guy next to me. He's the real jerk." Thanks," she said, completely thrown. "Xavier Trenton," he said, wiping his shirt with the napkin she handed him. "And you are Mara Tilden," his eyes narrowed slightly. "Mara Tilden." From the speeding ticket, her stomach dropped. "What? Yeah, that was you, right? Corolla PCH ticket at 2:30. You were still wearing that green bracelet from this place. I was behind you, saw the whole thing." Mara turned bright red. "Oh God, yes, that was me," he grinned. "You looked like you were about to cry, felt kind of bad," she laughed awkwardly. "Well, I was. My month's basically ruined now." Xavier reached into his jacket and pulled out a money clip. "How much was the fine?" "What?" No, I'm not. This isn't, let me rephrase," he said, tucking a few crisp hundreds into her hand. "I already paid it online. Saw your name on the ticket when the officer handed it to you. I asked a favor, got the citation number, paid it off." Mara stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "Why would you do that?" "Because you looked like you needed a win." She blinked at the money in her hand. "I can't accept this." "You already have," he said, clearly amused. "Consider it a thank you for trying to clean oyster off my shirt." The rest of the night was a blur. Mara couldn't stop thinking about him. The way he smiled. The way he just did things. Like paying off a stranger's ticket wasn't a big deal. Like dropping $200 wasn't even worth blinking over. She'd met rich people before, but Xavier wasn't like them. He wasn't bragging or smug. He was just calm, confident. Kind. Even when her shift ended, she didn't expect to see him waiting by the staff exit under a string of fairy lights. "You walking to your car?" he asked. "Yeah, it's parked a few blocks down. I'll walk with you." She hesitated. "Why?" "Because I want to." They walked in silence at first, the ocean breeze brushing her hair. Then he asked, "So, Mara Tilden, what's your story?" She laughed softly. "Boring. I teach art to middle schoolers. I waitress on weekends. I have a cat named Crayon. And apparently I drive too fast," he chuckled. "That's not boring." She glanced sideways at him. "What about you? What's your deal?" "I run a company." "Doing what?" "Tech, artificial intelligence, predictive systems." She raised a brow. "So you're one of those smart, rich guys." "I guess," he said with a shrug. "I'd rather be known for something else." "Like what?" He looked at her, and something flickered in his expression, sincere and quiet. "Helping people who deserve a break." She stopped in her tracks. "Is that what you think I am?" "I think you're working too hard, and I think you deserve something good to happen. So yeah." Mara's heart did a weird flip in her chest. They reached her car. She turned to face him, keys in hand. "Thank you for paying that fine. You're welcome. And for walking me, anytime." There was a pause. The kind that stretched, pulled, shimmered with something unsaid. "Good night, Xavier." "Night, Mara." He watched her get into her car, and just before she pulled away, she saw him smile. The next morning, Mara didn't expect the delivery, a white box, tied with a satin ribbon sitting on her doorstep. Inside, a pair of designer sunglasses, her exact style, a tiny note tucked beneath them, "For next time you speed." She covered her face with her hands and laughed, heart pounding in a way she hadn't felt in years. What the hell was happening? The sunglasses were still sitting on her kitchen counter 3 days later, gleaming under a shaft of morning sunlight. Mara had tried to ignore them, even shoved them in a drawer once, but somehow they always ended up back in plain view. Like they were daring her to admit what they really meant. It wasn't just a gift. It was a ripple, a shift in the air. She hadn't seen or heard from Xavier since that night outside the club. No calls, no messages. Nothing. And yet, every time her phone buzzed, her breath caught like it was waiting for his name to appear. She poured herself coffee that tasted like burnt pennies and yanked on a pair of jeans with a paint stain on the knee. Her Saturday class was starting in 20 minutes, and she was already going to be late. The community center was packed. Kids laughing, music echoing from the dance studio down the hall, and the faint smell of crayons and glue clinging to the walls. She dropped her tote bag on the table and called out, "All right, painters. Let's make some chaos," they cheered, scattering to their easels. Halfway through the session, as she was helping one of the younger kids mix colors, a quiet voice beside her made her freeze. "Excuse me, are you the instructor?" She turned, and there he was. Xavier stood just inside the doorway, wearing a slate-gray jacket and a look that didn't belong in this fluorescent-lit room. His presence felt too sharp, too precise for the mess of drying paint and sticky fingers around him. What are you doing here?" Mara blinked. "I needed to see for myself," he said simply. She crossed her arms. "See what?" He glanced around at the kids, the canvases, the chaos. "Where you shine." She stared at him, caught between flustered and annoyed. "This isn't a show. I'm not watching for entertainment." He looked her in the eye. "You said you teach. I wanted to understand what that means to you." She opened her mouth, then closed it. No one had ever said that to her, not like that, not with that kind of sincerity. "Can I talk to you for a second?" he asked. She glanced at the kids. "I can't leave them," he nodded. "Then I'll wait." He sat on the bench against the back wall, folding his hands as if this were perfectly normal. Like he belonged here. When class ended and the last kid ran out the door with a painting of a purple zebra, Mara finally approached him. "You just show up places often?" she asked, grabbing her bag. "Only when I have something important to say." "All right," she said, leading him out into the hallway. "Let's hear it." "I have a charity gala next weekend," he said. "It's a fundraiser for an educational initiative I'm launching. Scholarships, mentorships, new tech for underfunded schools." She blinked, caught off guard by the shift in tone. "That's incredible. I want you to come with me." "What? As my guest?" She gaped at him. "Why would you want me there?" "Because you belong in a room where people are talking about changing the world. You're already doing it." Mara stared at him, her pulse quickening. "Xavier, I'm not like your usual crowd. I'm not looking for usual, he said. I'm looking for meaningful. She leaned back against the wall. Do you always do this? Do what? Drop in, say all the right things, and leave people spinning, he stepped closer. Only when it matters. She studied him for a long moment, then tipped her chin up. Fine, I'll go. But I'm not wearing anything sparkly. We'll work on that, he said with a quiet curve of his mouth. They walked outside together, the late spring sun warming the pavement. Her car was parked down the block again, and she noticed his waiting vehicle, a sleek black Maserati parked with subtle confidence at the curb. He opened the passenger door before she could protest. Let me drive you home, she hesitated. I'm not a damsel. I know, he said. I just like spending time with you. Inside the car, the seats smelled faintly of cedar and something expensive she couldn't name. The silence wasn't awkward, it thrummed with something else. You don't talk like a tech guy, she said after a minute. I don't live like one either. Really? Says the man driving a car that costs more than my entire student debt. I meant I don't let the money talk for me, she turned to him. Then what does? He glanced at her, and for a moment the usual polish faded. There was something raw in his voice when he said, what I choose to do with it. They pulled up in front of her apartment building. She hesitated before getting out. You didn't ask for my number, she said. That's because I already know where to find you. He held her gaze for a beat longer than necessary, then watched her walk to the door. That night, she stood in front of her closet like it held the key to a different life. And for the first time in months, Mara Tilden let herself wonder what might happen if she stopped pushing good things away. She didn't know where this was going. But she was starting to believe it wasn't just a ripple anymore. It might be a wave. Mara stood frozen under the gilded archway of the Langmore Estate ballroom, her breath caught somewhere between panic and awe. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead like constellations trapped in glass, and the marble floor beneath her heels gleamed so flawlessly, she felt like she might slip into another dimension entirely. A string quartet played somewhere beyond the grand staircase, and the air smelled of lilacs and old money. And she, an art teacher who refilled her shampoo bottles with water to make them last, was wearing a custom silk gown that Xavier had delivered to her apartment 2 nights ago. No note attached, just a name stitched into the label. Mara. She didn't belong here. But when Xavier appeared at the top of the staircase in a tailored black tuxedo, all angular grace and quiet command, the noise in her head fell silent. His eyes found hers instantly. You came, he said as he descended, his gaze never leaving her. You didn't leave much room to say no, she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. I wasn't trying to trap you, he said, offering his arm. I was hoping you'd walk into something bigger than you're used to. She placed her hand on his sleeve. Mission accomplished. They swept down the hallway together, entering a room filled with the kind of people whose surnames landed on buildings and donation plaques. Xavier greeted them with firm nods and subtle gestures, people peeling off to speak to him in murmured tones, until finally they reached the terrace overlooking the gardens. Mara leaned on the railing, staring at the sea of candlelit tables below. Is this what you do every weekend? No. Most nights I'm in front of a screen or arguing with someone over ethics and algorithms. She glanced at him. And tonight, I wanted you to see the part most people assume I care about, the show, the money. But I wanted you to stand in the middle of it and realize none of it means anything compared to what you do with it. She shook her head, overwhelmed. I don't know what you're trying to prove. I'm not trying to prove anything, he said. I'm trying to show you that you're not out of place here. You just haven't been invited before. She turned to face him, the wind catching her hair. Why me? His answer was immediate. Because when I met you, you weren't trying to impress anyone, you were just surviving, and still you were kind. You were real. Before she could respond, an older woman approached, wrapped in a velvet shawl and dripping in diamonds. Xavier, she said with a knowing smile, and this must be the mysterious +1 everyone's whispering about. Mara, this is Evelyn Langmore, he said. She's the reason the foundation exists. Evelyn extended her hand. It's refreshing to see someone who looks like they know what the word work means. Mara shook it, caught off guard. I thank you, I think, Evelyn laughed. Don't let this place fool you. Most of them haven't held a job in their lives. You, on the other hand, look like someone who's paid a bill late and felt the sting. I have, Mara said without flinching. Then maybe you'll help him remember why this gala matters, Evelyn said, giving Xavier a pointed look before drifting away. Mara turned to him. She's intense. She built this empire with nothing but a typewriter and a lawsuit, Xavier said. She doesn't tolerate softness. And yet she tolerates you, Mara teased. I'm still trying to earn it. He guided her toward the dining area where place cards sat at a long mirrored table. Hers read Mara Tilden Guest of Honor, she blinked. Are you serious? I may have added that part, he said, pulling out her chair. But you are the reason I'm launching the expansion program. She sat slowly. You never mentioned that. He took his seat beside her. Because I didn't want you to think this was about charity. It's not. It's about impact. And you're the blueprint of what this program needs to support. Her chest tightened. You don't even know everything about me. I know enough to see the way you show up for other people when no one's showing up for you. The dinner proceeded with speeches, laughter, and toasts. Mara found herself speaking with people who asked genuine questions about her work, her students, her perspective on how to make education more accessible. She spoke without shrinking, without apologizing, and Xavier watched her like she was the most important thing in the room. Later, under the canopy of stars, he led her to the garden pathway lined with lanterns and ivy. You still think you don't belong here? He asked quietly. I don't know, she admitted. I think I'm still trying to believe it's real. He stopped walking and faced her, his expression unreadable. Then maybe I need to do something real. She tilted her head. What does that mean? Without another word, he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it not with a flourish, but with quiet certainty. Inside was a ring, delicate and stunning, with a sapphire in the center and diamonds on the band, catching the moonlight like it had waited its whole life for this moment. What she breathed. I'm not asking you to marry me, he said, voice low. Not yet. But I am asking you to say yes to something, to us, to seeing where this leads, without excuses, without pretending it's nothing. Her breath shook. You barely know me. I know enough to know I've never met anyone like you. And I don't want to keep pretending like I'm not already falling for you. Tears burned behind her eyes. Xavier, you don't have to say anything tonight, just take this, not as a promise but as a possibility. She stared at the ring, then at him. There was no pressure in his eyes, just hope. And something so vulnerable it undid her. She took the box and closed it gently. Okay, I'll see where it leads. He exhaled like he'd been holding the question in his lungs for weeks. Then he reached for her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. The orchestra inside shifted to a slow, haunting melody drifting out through the open doors. Dance with me, he said. No one's dancing. They will once we start. She hesitated only a second before stepping into his arms. And as he pulled her close and the music wrapped around them, Mara stopped wondering if she belonged. Because in that moment, she knew she belonged with him. The morning after the gala, Mara woke up in a bed that wasn't hers. It wasn't Xavier's either. They hadn't gone home together. After their dance beneath the stars, he'd walked her to his car, kissed her forehead, and said, You deserve to wake up in your own space with your own thoughts. Now, she was in a penthouse suite overlooking the marina, sunlight pouring in through floor-to-ceiling windows, the scent of salt water drifting in with the breeze. On the side table, a card with her name printed in gold lettering rested beside a breakfast tray. She blinked at the croissants, berries, and glass of fresh juice. Then she opened the card, half expecting something showy, but inside it simply said, You needed rest. I needed to make sure you had it. Mara sat in the silence for several long moments, the softness of the sheets cocooning her body, the weight of everything shifting inside her. He hadn't stayed. He hadn't pushed. He'd given her space and comfort, and not once had he tried to define it for her. She pulled the blanket tighter and whispered into the empty air, "I think I'm already in trouble." Later that afternoon, she walked back into her apartment to find her cat batting at the velvet box she'd left on the counter. The ring inside still sparkled like it had something to say, but Mara wasn't ready to wear it, not yet. Instead, she tucked it into the drawer beneath her sketchbook, then reached for her phone. Before she could overthink it, she called him. "Hi," he answered, his voice warm, grounded. "Thank you," she said, for not making last night about the spectacle, for letting it be about us." "I didn't want to rush you, I know," she said. "But I think I want to see you today, without music, without ballrooms, just you. Give me 15 minutes. He arrived in 10. This time, he drove something understated, a dark gray SUV that looked expensive only if you knew what to look for. He didn't say anything when she slid into the passenger seat. He just reached across the console and took her hand. They drove up the coast, past the cliffs and the hazy blue horizon, until the road narrowed and opened onto a private overlook she'd never noticed before. He parked, stepped out, and opened the trunk. "What are you doing?" she asked, watching him pull out a folded easel, a blank canvas, and a small crate of paints. "You said you only get to paint when no one's watching," he said. "So I brought you somewhere no one will." She stared at him, stunned. "You remembered that? I remember everything you say. You just don't say much yet." She set up the easel as he laid out the supplies on a picnic blanket, the wind tugging at her hair. When she dipped her brush into the first color, her shoulders relaxed in a way they hadn't in months. Xavier didn't ask what she was painting. He didn't hover. He just sat beside her, shoes off, jacket tossed aside, watching the horizon like it held answers. After a long stretch of silence, he asked, "Were you happy before all this?" "No," she said without hesitation. "I was surviving. But I'd convinced myself that was enough." "What changed?" "You," she said simply. "You didn't try to fix me. You just made space for me to be more than I was letting myself be." He didn't look at her when he said, "I used to think love was something you earned by proving you were worth it. That if you just built enough, achieved enough, someone would choose you. And now I think love is when someone sees you before you have to prove anything." She set down her brush and turned to face him fully. "Xavier, I was terrified of you at first. Not just because you're this force, but because I didn't know who I was around you. And now you do. I think I'm starting to." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "There's something I want to show you." She took it, unfolding it slowly. It was a grant proposal on her behalf. A fully funded art program for underserved schools across 3 counties. Her name was listed as the director. She blinked, overwhelmed. You did this." "You did," he said. "I just typed it up. I didn't ask for this, I know, but you needed it. And the kids you teach deserve it, so I made it happen." She pressed the paper to her chest, her heart skittering. "You didn't do this to impress me. I did this because I love you," he said, finally turning to her. "I love the way you show up for people. I love the fire under all that quiet. I love that you still doubt yourself, even when you're the strongest person in the room." Tears stung her eyes. "You really mean that?" "I've never meant anything more." She laughed through the blur of emotion. "I was so sure this was going to crash and burn." "It still could," he said. "But I'd rather crash with you than fly alone." She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. "I don't want to keep wondering if I'm enough for you. You're already more than I ever thought I'd find." He kissed her, then slow, certain, reverent. The kind of kiss that didn't demand anything in return, but still gave everything. When they finally pulled apart, she whispered, "I think I'm ready." "For what?" "To wear the ring." He didn't say a word, just reached into the picnic basket, pulled out the velvet box she didn't even realize he had with him, and handed it to her. She slid the ring onto her finger, the sapphire gleaming against her paint-splattered knuckles. "You sure?" he asked. "I've never been surer of anything." They stayed on the cliff until the sun dipped below the water, her head on his shoulder, his fingers tracing circles on her hand. Later that week, the community center announced the launch of the Mara Tilden Art Initiative, backed by the Trenton Foundation. And a month after that, in a quiet ceremony on the same overlook, With only a handful of students and friends in attendance, Mara said yes again, this time to forever. She'd gotten a speeding ticket, she'd met a billionaire. She never expected either would lead to the kind of love that rebuilt everything she thought she'd lost. But it had. And this time, she didn't run. 2 weeks after their private vow exchange overlooking the Pacific, Mara stood barefoot in the studio space Xavier had given her insisted on giving her on the top floor of a community center now bearing both their names. The sun filtered through the skylights above, pouring golden stripes across half-finished canvases, easels, and long, paint-flecked tables where students would soon gather for the first time. She dipped her brush in cobalt and leaned into the canvas, her strokes deliberate, her mind steady. For the first time in her life, she wasn't painting from pain or scarcity. She was painting from stillness, from joy, from a future she had once thought would always belong to someone else. Behind her, the door creaked open. "You're early," she said without turning. "I couldn't stay away." Xavier's voice, low and certain, held none of the restraint it once had. He crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You didn't answer my question this morning," he murmured. "You asked if I wanted tea or coffee." "No, I asked if you wanted to go to Italy with me next month." Mara set her brush down and turned to face him, his arms still looped gently around her waist. "Is this one of your I bought the villa already moments?" "No villa this time," he said. "Just a borrowed farmhouse a few weeks, and you. I want to disappear with you, no phones, no meetings, no foundations, just us." She blinked, then tilted her head. "You'd really walk away from it all, even temporarily?" "I've walked away from deals worth hundreds of millions. Walking into a quiet life with you feels like the only thing I've ever been absolutely sure of." She leaned into him, her forehead resting against his. "Then yes, let's get lost in Italy." He kissed her slow but not tentative. They had moved past uncertainty, past fear. Now there was only clarity. A knock at the studio door pulled them apart. It was Evelyn Langmore, looking oddly domestic in linen slacks and oversized sunglasses. "You two planning to open this place before I die of boredom?" Mara laughed. "Come in. I'll give you the tour." Evelyn's sharp eyes swept the room. "Not bad. You did all this with just a few signatures and some paint." Xavier raised a brow. "She did it with grit. The paint came later." Evelyn looked at Mara. "You holding him accountable? Every day." "Good," Evelyn said, nodding once. "He's better with you, less insufferable." After she left with a muttered promise to bring pastries to the ribbon cutting, Xavier turned to Mara. "She likes you? She tolerates me. Believe me, that's her version of love." Later that afternoon, the studio buzzed with the arrival of the first group of students, kids wide-eyed at the space, their laughter echoing against the high ceilings. Mara moved easily among them, guiding hands, encouraging bold colors while Xavier watched from the sidelines. His presence quiet but supportive, pride written plainly across his face. An hour in, one of the younger students tugged on Mara's apron. "Are you married to the guy in the corner?" she smiled. "Yes, that's my husband." The girl studied Xavier. "He looks like a prince in those movies." "He kind of is," Mara said, then leaned in. "But don't tell him I said that." When the class ended and the students scattered, Xavier walked over and took her hand. "I like being called your husband," he said, even if it was by a 6-year-old with paint on her face. "Get used to it," she said. "You're stuck with me now." He pulled her close. "That's exactly where I want to be." They spent the evening in the apartment they now shared, an open loft overlooking the city, its walls already covered in Mara's work and the quiet, everyday mess of a life finally lived. Xavier cooked. Mara danced barefoot to the jazz playing in the background. The ring on her finger caught the light and gleamed, but it was the way he looked at her like she was the most real thing in the world that made her feel adorned. As they curled beneath a blanket on the couch, her head on his chest, Xavier stroked her hair and whispered, "Do you remember the first thing I ever said to you?" "You mean after I threw oysters at you?" "No, before that, when I saw you get pulled over." She closed her eyes, remembering. You said I looked like I needed a win. I was wrong, he said. You didn't need a win. You needed someone to believe in you, and I needed someone to remind me that all the power in the world means nothing if you're not using it to lift someone else. She reached up and traced the line of his jaw. We both needed something we didn't know how to ask for, Xavier nodded. And we found it. The city lights glittered outside, but inside, the only glow that mattered came from the quiet certainty between them. It wasn't a whirlwind anymore. It was home. Not long after, the program expanded to 5 cities. Mara trained instructors, led workshops, and stood before microphones she once feared, speaking not because she needed to prove anything, but because people finally listened. And when they did, they heard the truth. Xavier split his time between his company and the foundation, but his favorite role, the one he took most seriously, was simply being Mara's partner. He never missed a gallery opening. He brought her coffee at sunrise. He held her hand as if it was the anchor that kept him steady. One evening, on the same bluff where they'd exchanged their first vows, he built her a small glass-walled studio overlooking the ocean. No ceremony. No press. Just a surprise and a plaque that read, "For the woman who turned my world into something worth painting." Years passed, their love deepening, quieting into something unshakable. They traveled, built, gave, and still found time to linger in bed on rainy mornings, tangled in blankets and silence. They never needed to chase the rush again, because they'd already found the forever they never saw coming. And this time, neither of them ran.